5:32 on a Wednesday morning in late October, I was up on a ladder in the freezer warehouse, wrist deep in a defrost coil that had iced over for the third time that month, when my phone buzzed against my hip. I ignored it. The coil mattered more. If I didn't clear it before the morning shift started loading trucks, we'd lose $40,000 in frozen tilapia by lunchtime, and I'd be the one explaining it to the regional director. Funny thing about cold storage, people think it just sits there, humming, doing its job. They don't think about the guy who knows that the compressor on Unit 4 makes a clicking sound about 30 seconds before it dies, or that the relief valve on the ammonia line needs to be hand-tested every Tuesday because the gauge lies. They don't think about him until the fish thaws. My name is Calvin Reeves. Cal to anybody who's worked a shift next to me, which used to mean half the men on the loading dock. I'm 56 years old. I've been the lead refrigeration technician at Pacific Cold Storage in Tacoma since 1999, back when this place was a single warehouse and a leased truck and a phone number that rang to the owner's kitchen. My old boss, Walter, hired me out of a community college HVAC program with a handshake and a promise that if I learned the ammonia systems, he'd never let me go hungry. He didn't. He passed in 2011, and his son sold the company to a private equity group in 2017, and somewhere between those two dates I went from being family to being a line item. That morning I didn't know yet that my phone had a calendar invite waiting on it. I didn't know that at 9:15 I'd be sitting across from a woman from HR named Bridget who'd flown in from Dallas and a lawyer with a salt and pepper haircut and a leather portfolio he kept tapping like a metronome. I didn't know that I was about to be told, in carefully workshopped language, that my position had been evaluated as part of an organizational optimization initiative and that my last day was the following Friday. I didn't know any of that. I was just trying to keep the fish frozen. By the time I climbed down off the ladder and washed the glycol off my hands, the calendar invite was sitting there on the home screen. Touchbase HR, 9:15 a.m., conference room A. No agenda. No context. 26 years, and they didn't even pretend it was about anything. I knew. You learn to read those subject lines the same way you learn to read a pressure gauge. The needle tells you what's coming, even if nobody said it out loud. I went home, showered, put on the same dark blue work shirt I'd worn for 2 decades, and drove back. I parked in my regular spot. I walked past the loading dock and waved at Manny on the forklift, and he waved back, and I wondered if it was the last time. By 9:14, I was sitting in conference room A with a paper cup of coffee that tasted like burnt copper, and at 9:15 sharp Bridget walked in with that careful, sympathetic face people wear when they're about to ruin your week and need you to believe they feel bad about it. She had a folder. The lawyer had a folder. I had my coffee. We were not evenly armed. She started with the script. I'd heard versions of it twice before, watching other guys get walked out. Strategic realignment, difficult decisions, headwinds in the market. The word redundant came up around the 2-minute mark, the same way it always does, like they teach it in the same class at the same business school. She slid the folder across the table. Severance. 2 weeks per year of service, capped at 26 weeks, minus taxes. A non-disparagement clause. A non-compete that would have been laughable in court but was clearly meant to scare me. A line about returning all company property by end of day Friday. The lawyer, who hadn't said a word yet, finally spoke. "We'll need your keys and your badge today, Calvin." I looked down at the cover letter. They'd addressed it to Mr. Calvin Reeves, Reaves, with an A. 26 years. They didn't even know how to spell my name. I want you to understand something. I wasn't surprised by the layoff. I'd seen the signs. The new operations VP they hired out of Chicago had been reviewing headcount efficiency for 6 months. The younger techs they'd brought on, the kind who could quote OSHA regulations but couldn't tell you which way the ammonia flowed in our system, were getting more responsibility. I'd been training one of them, a kid named Brendan, for the past 18 months on the explicit promise that he was going to be my support, not my replacement. I'd believed it because I wanted to believe it, I'd believed it the way you believe your knees won't give out on you, right up until the day they do. But the misspelled name on the letter, that cracked something. 26 years of birthdays I worked through. Christmas Eves I spent on call. The night in 2009, the ammonia sensor went off at 2 a.m. and I drove 40 minutes in a snowstorm because the kid on duty was too scared to handle it alone. And they couldn't ask Brendan how to spell my name. They couldn't look at a pay stub. They couldn't open the file. I set the folder down. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my keyring. 22 keys, every one of them labeled in my own handwriting with a label maker I'd bought myself in 2003. Master. To the main warehouse. Master to Unit 2. Master to Unit 4, the one with the click. The compressor room, the ammonia control room, the roof access, the transformer room behind Building C, the padlock on the propane cage, the padlock on the old pump house Walter had built in '98, the fence gate by the railroad spur, on and on. I set the ring on the table. The lawyer reached for it. I put my hand back over it just for a second. "You sure you want all of these?" I asked. He blinked. "Excuse me, you sure?" I said, slower. "Some of these go to systems that aren't on any inventory list. You want them?" Bridget jumped in with that practice calm. "We need everything, Calvin. Standard procedure." I lifted my hand. I slid the ring across the table. "Then there you go, all 22. I gave them my badge. I gave them my company phone. I gave them the laptop I'd never used because all my paperwork was on a clipboard in the compressor room. I signed the acknowledgement of property return. I did not sign the severance agreement. They told me I had 21 days to review it, and I told them I'd take all 21 days to review it, and I told them I'd take all 21. I walked out of conference room A at 9:42. Manny saw me cross the loading dock with the cardboard box of personal effects, and his face did something I'll carry to my grave. He set the forklift in park. He climbed down. He walked over. He didn't say a word, just clapped his hand on my shoulder and squeezed, and I had to look up at the ceiling for a second to keep my eyes dry. "Cal, what the hell? Optimization, Manny." He shook his head. He spat off the edge of the dock. "Who's gonna run Unit 4? That's not my problem anymore." I drove home the long way, past the diner where Walter and I used to eat breakfast every Friday for 9 years before he got sick. "It's a phone store now." "Of course it is. I want to be honest with you. When I got home, I sat in my truck in my own driveway for 40 minutes. I didn't cry. I just sat there, watching the squirrel work a walnut on my neighbor's fence, and I let the anger crawl up my spine slow, the way ice forms on a coil. Not the loud kind of anger, the other kind, the kind that gets quiet and patient and starts thinking. Because here's the thing they didn't know. Walter and I, back in 2003, when the company was growing faster than the books could keep up with, had a problem. The propane storage cage out behind Building C sat on a sliver of land that wasn't technically part of our parcel. It belonged to the railroad. We'd been leasing it from BNSF on a month-to-month for 18 months, and the rate was about to triple. Walter didn't have the cash. He asked me, as a favor, to put the lease in my name. I had decent credit. The company didn't. He said it was temporary, just till the lawyers untangled the parcel issue. He'd transfer it over within a year. I signed it. My name, Calvin Reeves, on a 20-year ground lease with BNSF Railway with a renewal option for the strip of land that holds our propane cage, our ammonia tank pad, and the only access road from Marine View Drive to the back of our facility. The lawyers never untangled the parcel. Walter forgot. He got cancer in 2009 and forgot a lot of things. His son took over and never knew the lease existed because it wasn't in any of the company files. It was in my filing cabinet at home, next to my mortgage paperwork and my daughter's birth certificate. For 22 years, I paid that lease out of a company account I'd set up with BNSF in 2003. using a corporate check that auto-drafted every January. The company paid it. They just never knew they were paying it, because the line item on the books said BNSF Easman, Annual, and Walter had set it up under a vendor code that nobody had touched in 2 decades. I knew about it because every January I got a renewal confirmation in my home mailbox, addressed to me personally as the lessee of record. And the lease was up. Not in January. In 6 weeks, November 30th. I'd been planning to handle the renewal in October, the way I did every year. Walk it down to the BNSF regional office, sign the paperwork, drop it in the file. 22 years of muscle memory. I hadn't done it yet. I'd been busy with the defrost coil. I sat in my truck for 40 minutes, and somewhere in the middle of that 40 minutes I started to smile. I called a man named Curtis Yardley. Curtis is a real estate attorney I'd known since high school. He'd done my will, he'd done my mother's estate, and he'd done a couple of small commercial leases for guys I'd referred to him over the years. He was retired now, mostly, but he still kept an office in a strip mall in Lakewood, with his name on the door in vinyl letters. "Carl," he said when he picked up. "Long time." "Curtis, I need you to look at something for me. Ground lease. BNSF. My name." There was a pause, then a low, slow whistle. "Cal, are you telling me I'm telling you they fired me this morning, and I'm telling you my name is still on a piece of paper that they don't know exists? Come over, now." I drove to Lakewood. Curtis read the lease for 45 minutes without saying a word. He took notes. He flipped back and forth between pages. At one point he got up and made coffee and didn't offer me any, which is how I knew he was working hard. When he finally looked up, he took off his reading glasses and pinched the bridge of his nose and said, "Cal, you don't just have leverage, you have the whole building. Explain." He explained. The ground lease was in my name as an individual, not as an agent of the company. There was no assignment clause. The company had no legal claim to it. The lease covered the access road. Without the access road, the company couldn't get a tanker truck to the ammonia pad. Without the ammonia pad, they couldn't run the refrigeration cycle. Without the refrigeration cycle, the entire warehouse becomes a very large, very expensive, empty box full of slowly thawing fish. And the lease expires when? November 30th, and the renewal has to be initiated by 60 days before expiration, so 30 days ago. He looked at me over his glasses. "Cal," he said softly, "did anybody from the company contact BNSF about that lease in the last 60 days? They don't know it exists." He nodded very slowly. He picked up his pen and started writing. "All right, we have work to do." The next 3 weeks were the quietest, most peaceful 3 weeks of my entire adult life. I slept in. I made coffee. I read the paper. I worked on my daughter's old bicycle in the garage, the one she'd left behind when she moved to Portland for grad school. I took my wife, Denise, out to dinner twice. I didn't tell her what was happening yet. I wanted to be sure. Curtis worked. He drafted a formal notice of non-renewal to BNSF, terminating the ground lease as of November 30th. He cross-referenced the lease language with Washington state property law. He pulled the parcel maps and confirmed the easement. He researched the ammonia handling regulations and confirmed that without the road access, the facility could not legally accept a tanker delivery, which meant it could not maintain refrigeration on its current cycle, which meant under Washington Department of Ecology rules they'd have to shut down operations within 7 days of running out of anhydrous ammonia. I checked the company's last ammonia delivery against my records. They were 16 days out from the next one. In the second week, I made one more call. Her name was Renata Aguilar. She ran a smaller, family-owned cold storage operation out of Fife that had been trying to expand for 3 years and couldn't find the land. I'd met her at a trade show in 2019. She'd given me her card. I'd kept it in my wallet because I keep everything in my wallet the same way my old man did. I called her on a Tuesday afternoon, Renata, this is Cal Reeves from Pacific Cold Storage. Cal, she said warmly, how are you? Renata, I'm going to ask you a strange question and I want you to take it seriously. If a parcel of land became available adjacent to a fully built-out cold storage facility in Tacoma, with an existing rail spur and ammonia infrastructure, in approximately 45 days, would your company be interested in negotiating a long-term ground lease for that parcel? There was a long silence. Cal, she said, are you serious? I'm serious. How long a lease? 20 years. Triple the current rate. Direct with BNSF. I'll introduce you. Cal, I would buy you a steak dinner for the rest of your life. Save it. I'll need a notarized letter of intent by Friday. She had it to me by Thursday. In the third week, Curtis filed everything. The non-renewal notice to BNSF, certified mail, return receipt, Renata's letter of intent. A formal notice to Pacific Cold Storage, addressed to the CEO, a man named Preston Whitaker who had taken over 6 months prior and whom I had met exactly twice. Curtis sent that one certified too, and also emailed a PDF to the General Counsel's office, and also copied the Operations VP and the new HR Director. The notice said in clean, neutral legal English that the ground lease covering parcels 4471RA through 4471CC, including the access road and the ammonia pad easement, would expire on November 30th, that it would not be renewed by the lessee of record, Calvin J. Reeves, individual, and that the lessor, BNSF Railway Company, had been formally notified. It noted that any continued use of the parcels by Pacific Cold Storage after November 30th would constitute trespass. It noted that BNSF had been independently approached by a new potential lessee whose proposed use would preclude any further access by Pacific Cold Storage. Curtis put a single sentence at the end. Mr. Prower, Reeves wishes the company well in identifying alternative arrangements. He hit send at 4011 on a Friday afternoon. I was in my garage when the first call came in at 4047. I didn't recognize the number. I let it ring. They left a voicemail. It was the General Counsel, Preston Whitaker's hired gun, a man named Aaron Stoltz, asking me to call him back at my earliest convenience to discuss a potential misunderstanding regarding company property and lease arrangements. I deleted the voicemail without listening to the end. The second call came in at 5:23. Bridget from HR. She wanted to check in about my severance package. She said the company was prepared to revisit some of the terms in light of new information. I deleted that one too. The third call came in at 7:14 p.m. It was Preston Whitaker himself, calling from his personal cell. I knew it was personal because he left a voicemail that started with, "Cal, this is Preston. I think we need to talk." We hadn't been on a first-name basis in any of our previous interactions. He'd called me Mr. Reeves both times. Now suddenly we were Cal and Preston. I listened to that one all the way through. He was trying to sound calm. He was failing. I could hear traffic in the background. He was driving somewhere. He said he understood there had been some communication breakdowns and he wanted to find a solution that works for everyone. He said he was prepared to discuss any reasonable accommodation. I saved the voicemail. I let him stew for 2 days. I went to church with Denise on Sunday for the first time in 6 months. I cooked her breakfast on Sunday morning. I told her, finally, what was happening. Not all of it. Just enough. She put down her fork and looked at me for a long time, and then she said, "Calvin Reeves, I have been waiting 20 years for you to stop being the load-bearing wall for those people." I called Preston back on Monday morning at 10 a.m. From Curtis' office, on speaker with Curtis listening. Preston. "Cal, thank God. Listen, I think we've had a serious misunderstanding." "I don't think we have." He paused. He tried a different tack. Cal, we've reviewed your situation, and I want to be clear that the decision to part ways was made before I had full visibility into your full contribution to the company. I'd like to offer you a consulting arrangement. Year-long, 6 figures, full benefits. We'd like you back. Preston, I'm not coming back. Cal, and the lease isn't transferring. November 30th, you lose the access road and the ammonia pad. I've already executed a letter of intent with a new tenant. BNSF has been notified. The new tenant has a 20-year offer on the table at 3 times your current rate, and BNSF is going to take it because BNSF is in the business of taking the better offer. The silence on the line was the most satisfying sound I'd heard in 26 years. Cal, you can't do this. This is the entire operation. 240 jobs. Preston, you fired the man who held that lease for 22 years. Without asking, without checking, without even spelling his name right on the letter. You think a man who got that letter is going to feel responsible for 240 jobs? What do you want? I looked at Curtis. Curtis nodded. Nothing, I said. I don't want anything from you. I just wanted you to know it was me. I hung up. The next 2 weeks were beautiful. The company tried everything. They sent Aaron Stoltz with a settlement offer of $300,000 to assign the lease. I said no. They went to BNSF directly and tried to negotiate around me. BNSF told them politely that they had a valid offer from another party and a notice of non-renewal from the current lessee, and that the matter was closed unless the current lessee chose to reverse course. The current lessee did not choose to reverse course. They tried to find alternative ammonia delivery routes. There weren't any. The only viable approach was through that access road. They looked into trucking ammonia in via tanker through the residential streets to the north of the facility. The city wouldn't permit it. They looked into temporarily switching the entire facility to a different refrigerant. The cost estimates came back at $14 million and a 6-month shutdown. On November 18th, 2 weeks before the lease expired, Pacific Cold Storage announced it was exploring strategic alternatives, which in corporate language is the second to last thing you say before you go bankrupt. The last thing you say is, exploring strategic alternatives with the assistance of restructuring counsel, which they announced on December 4th. By Christmas, the warehouse was empty. The product had been moved at enormous expense to a competitor's facility in Auburn. The trucks sat in the yard. Manny called me on Christmas Eve and told me they were laying off the dock crew. I felt bad about Manny. I told him I'd see what I could do. I called Renata. By February, Manny was working for her, running the loading dock at her new Tacoma facility, the one being built on the parcel I'd handed her. 3 other guys from my old crew followed him over. Renata hired Brendan too, the kid they'd trained to replace me. He's not a bad kid. He just didn't know what he didn't know. In March, I signed a consulting contract with Renata's company. Twice what I'd made at Pacific. I work 3 days a week. I set my own hours. I drove past the old building one afternoon in April. The Pacific Cold Storage sign was gone. The windows had paper taped over them. There was a for lease sign on the front gate, and the gate was padlocked. And I sat in my truck and looked at it for a long time, and I felt nothing. Not satisfaction. Not regret. Just a kind of quiet, the way the warehouse used to feel at 5:30 in the morning before anyone else got there. Denise asked me that night if I felt bad about the 240 jobs. I thought about it for a long time before I answered her. Most of those people landed somewhere. The good ones, the ones who knew what they were doing, got picked up fast. Manny landed. Brendan landed. The guys who'd been pulling their weight all along landed. The ones who didn't. That's not on me. That's on the people who, somewhere along the way, decided that the man who'd been keeping their building alive for 26 years was a line item to be optimized. I keep the original brass key, the one Walter handed me in 1999, on a hook in my garage, next to my dad's old toolbox and a picture of my daughter on her 10th birthday. I look at it every morning when I get my coffee, not as a souvenir, as a reminder that competence is the only thing they can't fire, that loyalty without respect is just unpaid labor with a smile on it, that somewhere out there, every day, there is a man or a woman holding a building together with their bare hands, while the people on the top floor try to figure out how to write them out of the budget. If you're that person, I want you to hear me. Keep your records. Keep your receipts. Keep the paperwork they handed you 20 years ago and forgot about. They will forget, you won't, and one day maybe the paperwork will remember for you. They thought they fired the maintenance guy. They fired the foundation, and foundations don't argue, they just walk away, and the building comes down on its own. I've fought a lot, in the months since all this happened, about why it ended the way it did. And the honest answer is that none of it was an accident. Every single thing that came down on Preston Whitaker and the people who fired me came down because of choices they made, one after another. Going back years, they chose to stop knowing the people who worked for them. They chose to treat institutional knowledge like clutter in a closet. They chose to hand a $65,000 a year severance to a man whose handshake had been holding their building up for 26 years. And they chose to misspell his name on the way out the door. None of that was bad luck. That was cause, and what followed was effect. The same iron rule that governs a refrigeration cycle governs a working life. You put bad in, you get bad out. You put a neglect in long enough. Eventually the whole system fails, and there isn't a consultant in the world who can patch it after the fact. But I want to be careful here, because revenge is not the lesson. Revenge is the surface. Underneath it is something I think matters more, and it's the thing I'd want my daughter to take from this. If she ever asks me to explain what her old man did that fall, there were 3 things that saved me, and they're the 3 things I'd hand to anybody listening. The first is decency. I didn't burn the company down. I had the leverage to do worse. I could have called the press, leaked the lease, made it a public spectacle. I didn't. I let the paperwork speak. I let them lose with dignity, even though they hadn't given me any. That mattered, not for them, for me. A man who cheats his way to justice doesn't get to keep it. The second is the slow, patient kind of intelligence that doesn't look like much from the outside. For 22 years, I kept a filing cabinet in my garage with paperwork most people would have thrown out. I paid attention to things nobody asked me to pay attention to. I remembered Walter's promises even after Walter forgot them. That isn't genius. That's the discipline of caring about your work past the point where anyone is watching. The world rewards it eventually. Not always, not on a schedule. But eventually. The third is the willingness to sit still in your own truck for 40 minutes, in your own driveway, and let the anger pass before you do anything. That's the hard one. Most men my age, handed that severance letter with the misspelled name, would have done something loud and stupid by lunchtime. I almost did. What stopped me was 26 years of working around ammonia, where one wrong move kills you. You learn to breathe before you act. You learn that the right answer is almost never the first one that comes to mind. Denise told me later she'd been waiting 20 years for me to walk away from those people. I wish I'd been brave enough to do it on my own terms instead of waiting for them to push me. That's the only regret I carry out of this whole thing. Don't wait to be pushed if you already know.